Our new members are Senator Schmidt, Britt, Schiff, and we also have a particular welcome to our newest senator from the state of Florida, Senator Ashley Moody. Welcome. Today, the only item on the agenda is the vote on Pam Bondi's nomination to serve as Attorney General. Last week, committee Democrats exercised their right under the committee rules to hold the nomination for 7 days. We honored this hold last week, so today is the time to vote out Ms. Bondi's. 2 weeks ago, she testified before this committee. That was about 5 hours of testimony, giving us a chance to learn more about her and her priorities. What we learned is that she is a tough person, a career in prosecution, but also a fair career prosecutor who built her reputation by enforcing the rule of law. She spent 18 years serving as a prosecutor before being elected 2 terms as Florida Attorney General. Her record shows that she's willing to tackle and to solve some of the hardest problems facing our nation. As Florida's Attorney General, Ms. Bondi focused on human trafficking, led the fight against opioid pill mills, protected consumers, and sought justice for victims of violent criminals. Her record and her testimony showed the American people that she will follow through and enforce the law fairly, without fear or favor. On the second day of her hearing, we heard from witnesses who praised Ms. Bondi's character, her fairness, her willingness to work with members of both parties to solve hard problems. So we heard from an elected Democrat who never voted for President Trump. He told us that Ms. Bondi was fair, tethered to the rule of law, and could work with both Democrat and Republicans to serve the American people. We heard from Florida's statewide prosecutor who praised her competence running the legal department of a 3rd largest state of our nation. We heard from a Florida sheriff who testified about her commitment to law and order and her partnership with law enforcement to keep Floridians safe. These witnesses have worked with Ms. Bondi for decades, and they all vouched for her capability and character. Ms. Bondi's nomination has received a flood of support from all across America. Law enforcement groups representing more than 650,000 officers wrote to this committee and urged us to support the nomination. A few of these groups include the National Association of Police Organizations, the Fraternal Order of Police, National Sheriff's Association, Major County Sheriffs, National Narcotic Officers Association, International Association of Chiefs of Police, and many others. This support is a testament to Ms. Bondi's history of backing law enforcement. We also received letters from more than 100 former senior DOJ officials, scores of U.S. attorneys, dozens of state attorneys general, women's rights groups, Second Amendment groups, and others who all strongly support the nominee. I'd like to take a few minutes to address some of the attacks against Ms. Bondi. Several members of this committee characterized Ms. Bondi as an election denier. This is inconsistent with her own statements because on multiple occasions during her hearing, Ms. Bondi stated that President Biden was the president and that she, quote unquote, accepted the results. As I said during the hearing, questioning the results of an election does not make one an election denier. If this is the criteria by which we judge public officials, scores of Democrats, including some on this committee, are similarly situated. Minority Leader Schumer cast doubt on Senator Casey's loss of Pennsylvania just a few months ago. Hillary Clinton, elected Democrats have called President Trump an illegitimate president and suggested the 2016 election was stolen. Stacey Abrams and even some members of this committee suggested the 2018 Georgia governor's election was quote unquote stolen. The attacks against Ms. Bondi on this point of a partisan double standard. Some of my colleagues also implied that Ms. Bondi's lobbying career should be disqualifying. This too was very unfair. Ms. Bondi disclosed her lobbying work and her clients to this committee beyond what she was even required to do. She's been more transparent than other recent nominees, and there is no reason to think that she would not follow the law and recuse herself when conflicts of interest are shown. Democrats didn't voice concern when one of President Biden's DOJ's nominees worked for China and Huawei during his time in private practice, nor did we hear concerns about former Attorney General Holder's lobbying activities. Now, when Senator Tillis pressed Democrat witness Ms. Jennifer Gilbert to articulate specific concerns with Ms. Bondi's lobbying career, she was unable to point to anything specific. She just kept repeating that Ms. Bondi's former clients would give, quote unquote, the appearance of impropriety. Vague assertions of potential conflicts of interest are not a reason to oppose a nominee who pledged to follow established procedures regarding these conflicts. Some of my colleagues also suggest that Ms. Bondi's loyalty to President Trump is somehow disqualifying. It is not persuasive in any way. There's nothing wrong with President Trump appointing someone who has fiercely defended him to a high position. Ms. Bondi publicly supported President Trump, just like 77 million Americans who voted him back into office in November. So this too is not a disqualifying attribute. The president has the right to choose an attorney general who is loyal and will faithfully carry out the vision for America that this president ran on. I note that Democrats did not voice concerns about the loyalty of Attorney General Holder, described himself as President Obama's wingman. And of course, we all remember that President John F. Kennedy appointed his own brother to serve as Attorney General. Many of my colleagues also suggested that Ms. Bondi was too partisan for a role at the Department of Justice. This is surprising to me, considering that many of my colleagues routinely voted for highly partisan DOJ officials and even judicial nominees over the last 4 years. And a few examples would be Vanita Gupta, who on opening night of the Republican National Convention in 2020 tweeted, quote, "Don't know if I can take 3 more nights of racism, xenophobia, and outrageous lies," end of quote. Matt Olson, Assistant Attorney General for National Security Divisions, was penned an op-ed to Time Magazine in 2016 entitled, quote, "Why ISIS Supports Donald Trump," end of quote. Judge Dale Ho, who suggested that his work was motivated by, quote, "hate for conservatives," end quote, and who described himself as a, quote, "wild-eyed sort of leftist," end of quote. These openly partisan statements didn't bother my colleagues, so if they're fair, they shouldn't be bothered by Ms. Bondi's support of President Trump. Finally, I want to address a smear from the legacy media who claimed that I was repeating a, quote, "discredited myth," end of quote, when I said that the, quote, FBI opened dozens of investigations into parents who voiced concern at school board meetings regarding curriculum choices and COVID-19 mandates, end of quote. To set the record straight, these are the facts. On October 4th, 2021, General Garland issued a memorandum directing law enforcement to address threats against school administrators and board members. This was in response to a letter requested by the National School Boards Association to President Biden that they later apologized for. That organization said, quote, "there was no justification for some of the language included in the letter." But that apology was too little, too late. By October 20th, 21, FBI Counterterrorism Division had acted on General Garland's directive and announced a new threat tag to use against parents voicing concerns. That threat tag was, quote, "EDU officials," end of quote, as in education officials. FBI whistleblowers came forward stating that, quote, "at least a dozen of investigations into parents," end of quote, and had been started using the new threat tag. As of October 27th, 2021, Senate Judiciary Oversight hearing, I directly asked Attorney General Garland to retract his memo. You know, he refused. On February 3rd, 2023, House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan subpoenaed FBI Director Wray for documents related to the misuse, what, quote unquote, the misuse of federal and counterterrorism resources to target parents. In response to the subpoena, the FBI acknowledged for the first time that it opened 25, quote, guardian assessments, end quote, including 6 that were run by the FBI Counterterrorism Division. These government-funded and resourced investigations didn't identify any legitimate threats. I'll now turn to Ranking Member Durbin.
Thanks, Chairman Grassley. If you want to know the role of the Department of Justice under President Trump, just listen to his words. He said, "I have the absolute right to do what I want to do with the Justice Department," end of quote. He not only uses the Justice Department to advance his political interest, but he's also promised to seek, quote, retribution against, quote, the enemy within. The president has repeatedly threatened to weaponize the justice system against those he feels have wronged him, and that's a long list. It includes career prosecutors, military officials, and his own former political appointees. Unfortunately, we are seeing these threats emerge in real time. Last week, the Trump administration reassigned and removed at least 20 senior career National Security Division and Criminal Division attorneys, including one prosecutor who had served in the National Security Division since its inception under George W. Bush. President Trump also forced out both FBI Director Christopher Wray and Deputy Director Paul Abate, creating a leadership vacuum in that important agency. These moves, clearly made in the interest of installing his own loyalists, put our national security and public safety at risk. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia is further proof of President Trump's commitment to putting his interests ahead of those of the American people. Last week, he installed Ed Martin as interim U.S. Attorney here in Washington, D.C. Mr. Martin was a leader of the so-called Stop the Steal movement to overturn the 2020 election, and Mr. Martin defended several January 6 rioters. Mr. Martin was on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol on January 6. He posted the following on social media, and I quote, "Like Mardi Gras in D.C. today, love, faith, and joy. Ignore fake news." End of quote. Mr. Martin has already dismissed all pending charges against January 6 defendants, shut down the section of the office that was handling those cases. He's opened an investigation into the office's January 6 prosecutions, apparently to begin carrying out Pam Bondi's promise to, quote, "prosecute the prosecutors, investigate the investigators." In a related development yesterday, Acting Attorney General James McHenry moved to fire a number of career Justice Department employees because, quote, "you played a significant role in prosecuting President Trump," end of quote. Retaliating against these career public officials who were simply doing the job they were assigned is patently unfair. Asked repeatedly who will execute the mass deportation effort, we have finally come to learn which agencies will bear that responsibility. They include the Drug Enforcement Administration, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and other Justice Department law enforcement agencies. Now, instead of investigating fentanyl and the firearms trafficking to Mexico to the cartels, DEA and ATF resources will be diverted toward deporting families who may or may not have any criminal record or be any danger to this country. And in the latest blow, President Trump's illegal funding freeze jeopardizes critical Justice Department grants that support local law enforcement and survivors of domestic violence, sex trafficking, and other violent crimes. Given the massive upheaval that President Trump has caused at the Justice Department in just the first few days in office, the next Attorney General will have their work cut out for them. As I said during Ms. Bondi's hearing, it is absolutely critical that any nominee for the position be committed first and foremost to the Constitution and the American people, not the president and his political agenda. Unfortunately, I'm unconvinced that Ms. Bondi shares my belief. She is one of 4 personal lawyers of President Trump that is already already selected for top positions at the Department of Justice. And she has echoed President Trump's calls for exacting revenge on political opponents. Ms. Bondi undermined our democracy by joining President Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. It appears she does not regret that decision, as she refused before this committee repeatedly during her hearing to acknowledge that President Trump actually lost the vote in 2020. During her hearing, I asked if she was familiar with the January 2021 phone call in which President Trump called on a Republican Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, quote, to find 11,780 votes. Ms. Bondi denied ever having listened to the phone call. However, in August of 2023, she appeared on a news program and defended President Trump's conduct with Raffensperger. She stated that his actions were, quote, not a crime and were instead, quote, free speech. She condemned the criminal charges that had been filed against President Trump due to his conduct on that call, where he asked the Georgia Secretary of State, quote, to find 11,780 votes. I asked Ms. Bondi to explain why she spoke so authoritatively on the legal strength of the case when she was, according to her own claim before this committee, unfamiliar with the evidence. Her explanation that she was on television, not in a court. It is deeply concerning that someone seeking the role of Attorney General believes it's appropriate to comment publicly on a criminal case without conducting even a minimal assessment of the evidence. The role of Attorney General is a serious one. It requires a person be committed to facts and the law, not someone who is willing to say whatever is politically expedient. During Ms. Bondi's hearing, I was surprised to hear her speak of a, quote, peaceful transition of power in 2021. In written questions, Ms. Bondi attempted to walk that statement back, instead referring to, quote, a smooth transition of power. I was in the Capitol building on January 6, 2021. The events of that day were neither peaceful nor smooth. You don't have to take my word for it. The 140 law enforcement officers who were assaulted by President Trump's supporters on January 6 can attest to what actually happened. Ms. Bondi also refused to comment on possible pardons for January 6 rioters who violently assaulted police officers. One of my Republican friends on this panel dismissed my question on the subject and said it was, quote, an absurd and unfair hypothetical to even ask whether President Trump was going to grant pardons to those who assaulted police officers. Now we know what happened. I also remain concerned about Ms. Bondi's deep ties to special interest. Her lobbying clients included an array of large corporations, Amazon, Uber, and a private prison company, Geo Group, along with the government of Qatar. Ms. Bondi has earned over $1 million as a lobbyist and hundreds of thousands more for providing legal services to major corporations. But Ms. Bondi notably did not recognize these entities as potential conflicts of interest as she's confirmed. That's why I asked the Justice Department and the National Archives for more information on her lobbying before the Trump White House and her foreign lobbying activities. We have yet to receive that information. And when asked to commit to recusing herself from matters involving her former clients, Ms. Bondi would only commit to consulting with DOJ ethics officials. The next Attorney General needs to enforce our antitrust laws and protect American consumers, not favor corporate giants. I went into Ms. Bondi's hearing with an open mind for obvious reasons. Yes, she was the Attorney General for the third largest state in the Union for 10 years. But there remains one question basically unanswered, whether she'd be willing to tell Donald Trump, President of the United States, and wealthy special interests no if faced with pressure to use her position as Attorney General to benefit those parties. In light of the Trump administration's actions over the course of the past few days, that question is even more critical, and I did not receive a satisfactory answer from Ms. Bondi. Since Watergate, there's been a bipartisan support for the idea that the Justice Department must be independent from the White House. President Trump's conduct during his first term underscored that need. I do not believe that Ms. Bondi will provide it. I hope she proves me wrong, but I cannot support her nomination. I yield to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Durbin. Today, I plan to stay as long as it takes for every member to speak, just as long as they want to. I want to follow the precedent of Chairman Durbin when he handled the Garland nomination. Since we have a quorum present, we can go ahead and call the roll on Ms. Bondi's nomination right away and then turn to statements by members. This is how we conducted the markup for Attorney General Garland under Chair Durbin, and I'd like to follow the same practice. On favorably reporting the nomination of Pamela Jo Bondi to be Attorney General, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Graham. Aye. Mr. Cornett.
Aye.
Mr. Lee.
Aye.
Mr. Cruz.
Aye.
Mr. Hawley.
Aye.
Mr. Tillis.
Aye.
Mr. Kennedy.
Aye.
Mrs. Blackburn. Aye. Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mrs. Britt. Aye. Mrs. Moody. Aye. Mr. Durbin.
Nope.
Mr. Whitehouse.
No.
Ms. Klobuchar.
No by proxy.
Mr. Coons.
No.
Mr. Blumenthal.
No.
Ms. Roanoke. No.
No by proxy.
Mr. Padilla? No. Mr. Welch? No. Mr. Schitt? No. Chairman Grassley?
Aye.
On this vote, the ayes are 12, the nays are 10.
What is it? Okay. The 12 to 10, yeah. The nomination will be favorably reported. Now we'll call on Senator Cornyn. Do you want to speak?
No, thank you.
Okay. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you very much. Attorney General Bondi was clearly an engaging witness. She was also clearly the twice elected Attorney General of her home state. And she said a lot of the right things. But the question for me that she faced was, if Trump asked her to do something illegal or unconstitutional, would she be capable to say no? That was the key question for me. And what I noticed as she testified here is that whenever she got into an area where there was a Trump sensitivity, it was like watching a plane fly into the Bermuda Triangle and all the navs and comms go suddenly haywire. During her hearing, she refused to acknowledge that President Trump lost the 2020 election. And we've just heard in the Budget Committee, the OMB director claimed that it was rigged. So this is a recurring theme in Trump land. She claimed there was a peaceful transfer of power in 2021, part of the effort to erase January 6th. She refused to agree that there is presently no predication to investigate Special Counsel Jack Smith or Chair Liz Cheney. She defended Kash Patel, claiming, I don't believe he has an enemies list, except that Patel had posted the list to social media with the caption, and I'm quoting his caption here, names named, roadmap unveiled, the manhunt starts tomorrow. If that's not an enemies list, I do not know what is. Will she be a restraint on this character if he becomes the FBI director? This guy also posted a video on social media showing him taking a chainsaw to members of his enemies list. Reposted by Kash Patel. We already see DOJ's independence under attack. People are being cleared out for doing assigned work that their senior members had told them they had to do. Career section chiefs at ENRD, the people with the skills to push back against polluters, have been reassigned or suspended to make it easier for polluters to violate environmental laws. It is getting to be a strange and dangerous time. Just one example was the Trump pardons of the violent offenders January 6th, which we were told would be hard to believe, even absurd, wouldn't happen. We were told that Republican senators were against it for people who assaulted cops, threw stuff at cops, broke down doors, broke windows. We were told if you committed violence, obviously, you shouldn't be pardoned. That by the now vice president. We were told that he's going to focus on all the people who didn't commit any violence. And we were told that when you pardon people who attack police officers, you're sending the wrong signal. But despite all of that, that is precisely what he did. He now has an army on the streets of people who have proven themselves willing to commit political violence at his behest, while also pulling back security protection for his perceived enemies. How violent are the people he pardoned? Well, it hasn't been long since the pardon and one's already been arrested. Another has been killed in a shootout in an armed confrontation with police officers. One already incarcerated for an armed standoff with police was pardoned while in prison. This is not normal. It's just one example of the way things are going. And somewhere, somehow, someone has to have the spine to say no. And I have regrettably concluded, based on watching that airplane spin into the Trump Bermuda Triangle, that Pam Bondi will not be that person, so that is why I voted no.
Thank you, Chairman Grassley. As I've said in a number of confirmation hearings, when I consider whether to vote for President Trump's cabinet and executive branch nominees, I look at three things. Do they have the relevant qualifications and experience? Do they have policy views that I think are not obviously in contravention of the basic interests of the people of the United States? And do they have the character and independence to do the job with integrity? Attorney General Bondi clearly has the experience to serve as U.S. Attorney General. She served for 2 terms as Attorney General of one of our largest states, was a prosecutor for decades, and I understand that we will disagree on large areas of policy given that she's been nominated by a president of the other party. We could spend a lot of time on this, but I'm going to focus on a simple question that I think decides my vote here. It came down to the third piece, whether or not Ms. Bondi possesses the character to run the DOJ independent of orders from President Trump and the White House that would put at risk our system of ordered liberty and our Constitution. I wanted to know from her specifically, would she refuse to obey an illegal order or resign if pressed? I asked her that in our private meeting and told her I would ask it again in her public hearing and tried to work through with her what her views were and what her answer was. She refused to answer the question in private and in public, saying that she would not have accepted the nomination if she thought President Trump would ever put her in that position. Some of you may remember I asked that in her confirmation hearing, and she said she wouldn't answer a hypothetical, especially one saying that President Trump would issue an unethical or illegal order. I believe Senator Blumenthal asked the same question, Senator Hirono asked the same question without response. I gave her yet another chance to answer the question directly, having described it as the key to getting my vote for her confirmation when we met privately, in writing, and she refused to answer. How hard is it to say that you would refuse an illegal order? In 2019, in his confirmation hearing, I asked President Trump's last Attorney General, Bill Barr, whether he would resign if asked to do something illegal. And his response was brisk and direct: I would resign. Actions taken yesterday, I believe, show that Ms. Bondi's answer misses a painfully obvious point that this is not hypothetical. The OMB issued an illegal and unconstitutional order freezing hundreds of billions of dollars of duly appropriated and authorized federal grants, funding that Congress had lawfully appropriated. I get it, President Trump was elected and will have the opportunity to put his stamp on the policy priorities of our appropriations going forward. But this is reaching back, grabbing and freezing appropriations that had already been passed by Congress and signed by a president. That includes funding for my home state and all of yours that the Department of Justice, state and local law enforcement rely on to do their job. Cops hiring grants. This is literally defunding the police if carried out. Drug task forces. No more funding to fight opioid abuse. School violence prevention programs. No more money to keep kids safe in schools. Delaware and all of our state and local fire and first responder and police organizations rely on federal grants to do their work. And if they are frozen or paused for an indefinite period, it has impacts that I think go well beyond the guardrails of what is permissible. This directive was so clearly outside the boundaries of presidential power that a federal judge blocked it within minutes after its application and just hours after a lawsuit seeking a TRO was filed. Let me conclude. Based on her answers, I do not have confidence that Ms. Bondi, in a similar circumstance as this week, would have told the White House or President Trump that that directive was not just ill-conceived, but illegal. Even if she knew it was unconstitutional, I don't believe she would have resigned. And I cannot vote for an attorney general that I can't trust to stand up for the rule of law. I suspect Ms. Bondi will be confirmed, and I hope that she leads the department with the integrity and independence our system requires. We had a constructive conversation about her record, referenced by the chairman, in working on the opioid crisis and working on criminal justice reform. I have a number of bipartisan bills to address issues like supervised release, helping people leaving prison get driver's licenses, simple common sense progress on criminal justice reform. During our meeting, she said if confirmed, she'd have an open door policy and work across the aisle. I hope that too is true, and I look forward to taking her up on that offer if she is confirmed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was noted by our chair and many throughout this process that indeed Pam Bondi was the first woman to serve as the elected Attorney General in the state of Florida. I had the honor of being her successor in that role as Florida's Attorney General. I now join you as a colleague. I am so honored to be among you. But I also have the honor of appearing at my first committee hearing and taking my first vote in committee to support her nomination as the United States Attorney General. Much has been said this morning, and I would like to address some of the accolades of Pam the prosecutor. It has been suggested she may not stand up to large corporations or business interests, but I would remind everyone that as Florida's Attorney General, she worked in a bipartisan fashion with attorneys general from both parties to go after and bring recoveries to Americans and certainly Floridians. She was the tip of the spear on some of our largest battles. She was a trailblazer. She never compromised her integrity, prosecutorial independence, or fidelity to the rule of law. And I would tell you, everyone in Florida would say she never backed down from a challenge, no matter how large the corporation on the other side. So no matter who you were, how much money was in your bank account, how big your business was, if you were harming Floridians, she was going to go after you. She fought for homeowners in the housing market crash and held the nation's largest lenders accountable for the housing crisis. She secured more than $50 billion in recovery. She launched Florida. I often get a lot of the credit for resolving it, but she was the one to launch Florida's action against some of the largest manufacturers and distributors of opioids in this nation when we started losing record number of Americans to opioid overdose deaths. She fought for accountability for the oil spill in the Gulf of America. She secured $20 billion for states affected by that disaster. She locked up human traffickers with a near perfect conviction record. She recovered billions of dollars for Americans and Floridians based on her bipartisan consumer protection actions. We've talked a lot about Pam, the prosecutor who never forgot a victim, personally went to crime scenes, still stays in contact with those victims, never wavered in her cause to seek justice for them. Unlike so many other of our former U.S. attorneys general, she's actually been to the scenes of crimes on multiple occasions and still fights for the victims that she sought justice for so long ago. Indeed, Pam, the prosecutor who has a stellar record, will make an incredible attorney general. But personally, having known her for decades, I'd like to switch from Pam, the prosecutor, to Pam, the person, to assure so many, not just those sitting here today, but so many Americans that are watching these hearings and my fellow Senate colleagues that will ultimately vote, that she has the strength to stand up against corporations, even those in her own leadership, to do what is right under the rule of law and to protect Americans. She is tenacious when she is seeking to bring justice to victims. She's personally led the charge and really led a movement across this nation to eliminate the enormous backlog of untested rape kits in Florida. And through those efforts, cold cases were solved, sexual predators were locked up, And I got to announce in my first year in office that we completed the testing of every one of those untested sexual assault kits. When Florida was deemed the pill mill capital of the world, and we had more pill mills than we had McDonald's in the state of Florida, when 90% of the largest distributing pill mills were in Florida, of the entire nation, she personally took that on, worked in a bipartisan way to shut down the pill mills in Florida, and we were glad to shed the title of the pill mill capital of the world. And it is still urban legend. In Tallahassee, Florida, the capital of Florida, it is urban legend what she was able to accomplish when we started losing record number of people to fentanyl in this nation, when fentanyl became such a deadly poison, ravaging our working and fighting age Americans, even our children. She took that on, even when some in leadership didn't go along with it. She personally visited Republican and Democratic lawmakers with a vial of grains of sand and showed them how deadly that substance was. And even when leadership wasn't anxious to go along, she fought for that and won that vote by one. I can assure you, Pam, the person, would never allow herself to make any decision or take any action as Attorney General through a lens of red or blue. She has never been persuaded by those who might hold power. She is driven by her insatiable desire to protect people and ensure justice. I can assure you she loves this country. She reveres our judicial system. She safeguards it, and she knows that it is there to protect persons and their inalienable rights. Our judicial system has hit a record low in trust by the American people. We should all be fighting every day to change course. Just as she has done for countless victims, she will claw back this nation's trust in our judicial system and the DOJ. She will not hide behind court filings or press releases. She will be frank and passionate with the American people and fight for them as she has done her entire career. Our justice system itself has been victimized by those who have used it and exploited it for political warfare. She will fight for this country she loves, its people, and the integrity of that judicial system. Our judicial system must be made whole. We must restore trust in it to maintain the strength, stability, and continuity of this great nation. And finally, in my remarks regarding our soon-to-be Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi, and Pam the person, I think it's important to let everyone know when I became the Attorney General behind her, she wasn't as interested in making sure I remembered to recognize her for her achievements or for what she had done for Florida. All she cared about was my success in continuing to protect Floridians, our state's autonomy, and the safety of those in our state. And it is evidenced by what she left me on the day she left office. She left me a note card with a personal note. She said, "Ashley, you will be the greatest AG." And you know what I get to say now, Mr. Chairman? Right back at Pam Bondi. Pam Bondi will make the greatest United States Attorney General.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Klobuchar is next. I'm going to be gone about 3 minutes, so I don't lose my line in seniority down in finance, and then I'll be right back. So,
Mr. Chairman, I don't think you'll ever lose your line in seniority.
Number one.
Senator Grassley, I will not lose my line in not seniority, lowest in fine.
Okay, I am just going to speak for 2 minutes in deference to my colleagues. And I had chairing another hearing and heading to another one, but I wanted to record my vote officially as opposed, as I know we voted by proxy. And I just want to simply say I appreciated our new colleague's words about her friend and colleague. I ask consent that I vote as present and here, as opposed. Okay, thank you. I enjoyed meeting Pam Bondi, appreciated the opportunity to talk to her about our shared priorities, including cracking down on fentanyl, human trafficking, supporting law enforcement, promoting competition in the economy, and I truly do look forward to working with her on these issues. I do have concern that I know Senator Durbin and my colleagues have expressed about her ability to ensure the independence of the Justice Department. President Trump and his nominee to head the FBI have made repeatedly clear that they want to use the department to get revenge on their political opponents, and they're actually showing it. And for the shared priorities that we've talked about, these have not been the priorities of the Trump administration. Instead, in less than 2 weeks since he was sworn in, the president simultaneously used the Department of Justice to punish prosecutors investing crimes related to assaults on U.S. Capitol Police officers, pardoned those responsible for the assault, and denigrated prosecutors who put in jail someone whose website caused the death of 6 people. In his first hours in office, the president issued an executive order directing the Attorney General to re-examine scores of investigations and prosecutions at the department over the last 4 years. This week, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia ordered an investigation of the charging decisions of the prosecutors involved in the January 6 cases. But what really concerns me, and what I do look forward to talking with Pam Bondi about if she is confirmed, and I do look forward to discussing this with her because we both shared a common background as heading up prosecutors' offices of career prosecutors, as our new colleague just noted. Here we have a case where prosecutors who throughout the department have worked apolitically for decades, apolitically to uphold the rule of law and keep our country safe. They just get randomly assigned to cases sometimes. New people come in, they get put on cases. And to fire these people simply because they have been placed on cases, career people, is just wrong. We're looking at the Assistant Attorney General for National Security and the Assistant Director of Counterterrorism, as well as the most senior career official who for years has worked to ensure that DOJ leaders comply with ethics requirements and with rules designed to keep politics out of the department's work. Whether a new attorney or an experienced professional, these are lawyers who have taken an oath to the Constitution and whose loyalty is to the noble mission of the Department of Justice and not the politics of a particular president. I am also very concerned about the grants and the funding and all of the activity of yesterday, which has put a hold on so much of the work to keep our communities safe. I will put the rest of my statement on the record. I thank my colleagues, and I really do hope that Ms. Bondi can show that independence that we value. I say this with hope. I am very concerned, so I am voting no, but she does have an opportunity in that independent role of the Attorney General of the United States of America to stand up to this kind of illegal activity. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. I will recognize myself. And to my colleagues, I am so pleased that we have moved forward with Pam Bondi this morning. And as she said in her confirmation hearing, her goal is to restore confidence in the Department of Justice. And this is a good thing. The American people are so fatigued with a two-tiered justice system. And what they want to see is equal justice for all. Something else I have appreciated is that she will crack down on violent crime and push to make our cities and our communities safe again. We've seen such an uptick in violent crime. It doesn't matter if it is Memphis or Chicago or New York. Much of this is related to gangs that have entered our country. They are in our communities, and unfortunately, we have seen every town become a border town, every state a border state. And she realizes that this border security is national security, and they're going to have to work hand in hand on this to protect our country and to end the political cabal that has existed at the DOJ that we saw under the previous administration. The other thing I think is so significant is her career as a prosecutor, and knowing that she spent 18 years as a prosecutor before the 8 years that she spent as Florida's Attorney General. So we are well aware that she is well confirmed, and we look forward to that confirmation. And who is on? Senator Hirano? You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For me and probably many other Democratic members of this committee, there were concerns going into Ms. Bondi's hearing that she would not have the independence necessary to be the Attorney General. Indeed, if confirmed, she will be the Attorney General to a president who expects 100% loyalty from his nominees. The question is whether she will have the strength to stand up to a president who views the office of the Attorney General this way, quote, "I have the absolute right to do what I want with the Justice Department." Unfortunately, Ms. Bondi's answers to questions did not convince me that she will be independent. For example, I asked her if she agreed with the president's characterization of January 6 felons as hostages and patriots. She refused to answer. Meanwhile, the president, we know, has pardoned all of these violent felons. I asked her in writing how she would resolve a conflict between a request from President Trump and her duty to the Constitution. She provided no response and left the answer blank. This refusal to even try to answer the question told me a lot. We have already seen in the 9 days since he took office that President Trump has little regard for the law. He issued a blatantly unconstitutional order on birthright citizenship. He has ignored statutory protections by purporting to fire inspectors general and agency board members. And he put an illegal hold on billions in federal funds and grants to states and local governments that provide support for our families, children, and seniors. We need an Attorney General who will tell him when his actions would break the law. Ms. Bondi will not be that person, so I cannot support her nomination. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colleagues, after carefully evaluating Ms. Bondi's record and after her testimony before this committee, I continue to have significant reservations about her ability to serve as an independent Attorney General who will put her duty to the Constitution and to the American people above her loyalty to President Trump. So for that reason, I'm unable to support Ms. Bondi's nomination to serve as our nation's chief law enforcement officer. And I say this after recognizing, through the course of our private meeting in my office and through the course of her testimony during her confirmation here, that there were some glimmers of potential agreement in areas that I'd be hopeful to maybe agree and work together on, things like tackling the threat and the dangers of human trafficking, things like her positions on gun safety, building on some of the work in the state of Florida, where she served as Attorney General, that seemed to be common sense ideas that can and should be spread across the country. But instead of focusing on those, Ms. Bondi kept coming back to her unwillingness to answer some key questions. I remain deeply concerned about Ms. Bondi's willingness to go on national television and propagate lies about the results of a free and fair election, despite a total lack of evidence. I raised this during the hearing, colleagues, as you recall, not because they were political talking points that she was pushing that I might have happened to disagree with, but they were outright lies that pose a real threat to our democracy, a threat to voters, and a threat to the election workers who dedicate themselves to administering our elections. I was specific, repeatedly offering Ms. Bondi an opportunity to retract her statements during her confirmation hearing, as she continuously refused to state the simple fact that President Trump lost the state of Pennsylvania in 2020 and lost the election. And I remind us of this, colleagues, because it's important to remember that Ms. Bondi's associate at the time in 2020, Rudy Giuliani, has been disbarred for spreading the same lies. Same lies, Mr. Giuliani disbarred, and it seems that now Republican senators are on the verge of confirming Ms. Bondi to serve as Attorney General of the United States, despite peddling the same lies and her unwillingness to retract them. That should have been the easy part, because no doubt Ms. Bondi will face far more daunting challenges as Attorney General to shield the department's work and professional civil servants from politicization and weaponization. And we've seen what's happened just in the last couple of days as evidence of what will continue to happen. It is not hypothetical. Look at the president's activity this last week alone. Despite some of my colleagues' assurances that he would refrain, President Trump has issued roughly 1,500 blanket pardons for January 6th insurrectionists and commuted the sentences of 14 of his supporters, including those convicted of violence against police officers. Trump's appointees then fired several career Department of Justice lawyers involved in investigating and prosecuting him for his role in the January 6th insurrection and for his improper handling of documents. And now the acting U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia has already promised to investigate the prosecutors who helped put the violent January 6th insurrectionists behind bars. That's the environment that Pam Bondi is about to enter, a difficult environment for any attorney general to act independently. And I was particularly struck by the fact that despite practicing law for decades, 2 terms as Attorney General of the state of Florida, private practice experience, despite all that, Ms. Bondi claimed to be unfamiliar with the 14th Amendment and the citizenship clause within it. She and I discussed the very issue when we met one-on-one. It's clearly been in the news. And when given the opportunity to discuss it during the hearing, here in public, she refused to answer. Even worse, offensively, either claimed that she needed to study or telling me that she was not going to be doing my homework. Colleague, in that moment, I wasn't asking her to do my homework. I was asking her if she did hers. And now we know why she avoided the topic. Because just a couple weeks later, President Trump has issued a blatantly unconstitutional executive order seeking to strip birthright citizenship from Americans who were born here. The law is clear. The Constitution is clear. But what's increasingly clear is that when push comes to shove, Pam Bondi is not the kind of person who will defend the Constitution, defend the 14th Amendment, or defend Americans when the president instructs otherwise. The American people need and deserve to have faith that the Department of Justice enforces the law fairly, neutrally, and free from political interference. We need and deserve an Attorney General who will push back against illegal, immoral, and unethical requests. And unfortunately, I don't believe Ms. Bondi is up to the task. But with that being said, I do hope one thing, because she seems very likely to be confirmed. I hope she proves me wrong. For the sake of our country and for the American people, I hope she proves me wrong. But today, I cannot support her confirmation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Pam Bondi is qualified. She has done outstanding work as an Attorney General, both as a county prosecutor and as a Florida Attorney General. And I actually quite admire the grit that she had to take on a challenging, a statewide campaign to become Attorney General. Number two, she had very good testimony from Republicans and Democrats about her managerial style. And when I met with her, she was very engaging and responsive to the concerns I have about criminal justice. She's qualified. The question that we face as a Senate is what kind of Department of Justice will we have? There has been a bipartisan recognition of the importance of independence at the Department of Justice. So will we have a Department of Justice that is independent, or will we have a Department of Justice that, in the words of President Trump, is my Department of Justice, where I have the right to do anything I want to do? There's no question about where President Trump is going. 9 days into the president's administration, he is on a rampage of reckless conduct and illegal conduct. The reckless conduct, of course, are these horrible pardons